So have you ever wondered why you can't feel what it is that you're feeling? And what I mean by this is, have you ever been in a situation, have you ever been in a circumstance where you know that you got some emotions coming up, you know that there's some things there, but you just don't know what it is. You just don't know how to feel those things. Well, in today's episode, I want to talk to you about 3 reasons why you may not be able to feel what you're feeling and 3 steps that we can take to reverse that. So if you're ready to learn with me, let's dive in. What's going on, Recreators? This is Nick back with the Life Recreator podcast. I'm a mental health advocate and I'm helping you to learn, heal, and grow on your journey. And so today I want to dive into this subject of why you can't feel what you're feeling. So number 1, oftentimes we can't feel what we're feeling because we don't know the name of the emotions that we're feeling. And I know that sounds super simple to think about, but think about it with me like this. Oftentimes we're taught growing up that there's only like this handful of emotions. There's only like anger. We may see happiness. We may see sadness there. We may see excitement, but it's very limited. And something that I realized and I started discovering in my own personal journey was how limited I was in identifying and really naming what it is I was feeling at any given moment. And so if you were to think about with me, if you had to bake a cake and somebody, gave you this recipe for a cake, but they didn't give you the ingredients that you needed to make the cake. They told you everything else. They told you how much you needed to preheat the oven to. They told you, that you needed to grease the pan up, that you needed to do all these different things, but they didn't give you the ingredients. How in the world do you think that at the end of that, you're going to be able to put a cake together if you don't know what's going into that cake? See, the problem in that situation is that I don't know the specific ingredients and I can't identify those ingredients. And so therefore I can't make a cake. Now, if we were to take that analogy and look at our feelings and our emotions, there are times when situations happen, things may trigger us, people may trigger us. Memories may come up that come into our lives. And when these things come up, if I don't know how to put a name to them, if I don't know how to identify them, then really I can't really tell how I'm feeling. So what ends up happening? Many a times I might have a feeling that pops up. This happens, I feel like it happens with us as men a lot of times, where because I don't know how to identify a feeling, I just lump it in the category of anger. Or I lump it in the category of excitement, or, like I just put it in this certain category of happiness, right? Not really understanding like what it is that I'm feeling. And so part of our growth and part of our maturity in life is to really start to understand this inner world, this complex world that we got going on inside of us, and all these different feelings and all these different emotions. And so part of the reason that we can't feel what we're feeling in the beginning of this is not understanding and not being able to identify what those feelings are. Many times, I talked about it in a recent episode, many of us, we've experienced things like emotional neglect, right? Our family, our caretakers, those that raised us and brought us up, they didn't give us the emotional attention that we needed. They weren't in tune to what we were feeling and how we were feeling. And so because of that, what ends up happening is that with that emotional neglect, we get that paired with emotional shame. We get shamed for the things that we may be feeling. I remember growing up for myself, I was a sensitive kid. I was a kid that I paid attention to, certain people around me, certain ways that, things were making me feel. And sometimes because of those situations, I remember really young, really early on, just being able to pay attention to and pick up on those emotions and having those emotions affect myself. And so over time, as I started growing up, and I started learning because of my environment, because of how people were responding to my emotions, that maybe it wasn't right for me to really put these emotions out. Maybe it wasn't correct for me to be expressing these emotions. And so oftentimes we get shamed for what it is that we're feeling. And if you get shamed long enough for feeling a certain way, guess what you're going to do? You're going to say, you know what? I'm going to learn in my mind that I probably shouldn't shouldn't show that feeling. I probably shouldn't show that emotion, because if I'm going to show that emotion, if I'm going to say these things, if I'm going to speak a certain way, if I'm going to cry when things get too difficult, if I'm going to be upset about things not going a certain way, then I just learn, hey, it's better for me to just shut that down and not say anything. So sometimes this emotional shame from my feelings, it can make us feel like the things that we're feeling, or the ways that we're expressing, or the way that these emotions are coming up, they can make me feel like they're a sign of weakness. Right. And so as a man, guess what? I'm not trying to be weak. I'm not trying to have people look at me as weak. So I oftentimes begin to just shut down those emotions. And here's the thing with emotions. If I shut them down long enough, when they start to come up, I'm not going to recognize when they come up. If I shut them down long enough, when they arise or they pop up in certain circumstances, I'm not going to be able to identify them anymore, because I've completely shut myself off from them. So this whole issue of being able to identify our emotions is one of the first steps. I want you, and I challenge you, go through your day and start to identify the things that you're feeling. When certain things happen, maybe it might be with your partner, it might be with your children, it might be at work. When all these different things start happening in life and you start getting triggered here and there by all these different emotions, I want you to start seeing if you can identify what it is you're feeling. When I did an experiment last year on learning how to identify my emotions, I was really big into learning how do I grow myself emotionally as a man? How do I become emotionally mature? Because I started realizing how important it was for me as a man to learn how to identify my emotions, and to learn how to even take it a step further and behave in a way that was healthy and constructive rather than destructive in my life. And so as I'm going through this experiment, man, I'm realizing, there's a lot of things coming up that I can't put a name on. Like, I'm feeling a certain way, but I'm just stuck in putting a name on this thing. And so when I started realizing those different things, I realized, okay, this right here is something that I got to work on. I got to learn how to identify. So the first reason a lot of times that we don't know how to feel what we're feeling is because we can't put a name to what it is that we're feeling. The second thing that we run into is that oftentimes we tend to judge our emotions instead of investigating them. We judge our emotions instead of investigating them. This ties back into what I was talking about in that first problem. If oftentimes we were shamed for feeling a certain way, if we were judged for feeling a certain way, then we oftentimes take that behavior and we understand, or we might try and put that in our lives and realize that when I have these certain feelings and these emotions, my response should be to judge them rather to investigate what's going on. Now, if we were never taught oftentimes that our emotions are clues, we'll oftentimes treat them as proof that something is wrong with us. If nobody in our life as we were growing up ever said to us that the way that you're feeling and the things that are coming up as far as emotions are concerned are supposed to be clues to help you and guide you along this path, but rather they were taught to us that they were things that we should judge, when we have emotions that come up, we're going to think that something's wrong with us. This happens to me as a man often. Let's say I experience something in life that makes me just feel down. It makes me feel sad. It makes me want to cry. It makes me want to just express some of how I'm feeling inside in a way that oftentimes growing up I was taught may have been something that I was supposed to judge, may have been an emotion that I was supposed to judge. Well, what ends up happening as an adult now is I'll have these emotions come up. And when they do come up, I'll feel like there's something wrong with me. Like I'm not supposed, like think about this. How many times have you ever said to yourself, man, I'm not supposed to feel like this. Like, why do I feel like this? Why, like I'm not supposed to be like this. I'm not. And how does that even make sense? If we can't control the emotions and when these emotions come up, then how can I put a label on that saying that something's wrong with me? Because we don't know, right? We don't know if you were to look at like research and all these things. Scientists are still trying to figure out, where do these emotions come from? Where do they pop up from? Why are they showing up? Why are they, why are they so elusive sometimes? Why are they so out of nowhere sometimes? Where do these emotions come from? We're still trying to figure all those different things out. But if I start judging my feelings and judging these emotions that come up and making it seem like there's something wrong with me for feeling that way, then it's going to be hard for me to want to feel that way. Does that make sense? Like, it's going to be hard for me if I'm constantly judging the way that I feel for me to want to feel that way, because I'm going to feel like something's wrong with me. See, one of the things that I feel like we've done to children and even just in raising ourselves is judging the way that people feel, judging the way that people feel, judging their emotions on the outside, judging their emotions. And you know what that does to us? It makes us want to not trust ourselves. It makes us not want to understand more what's going on internally with us because somebody is now judging us on the inside. It gives us somehow proof that there must be something wrong with us. I'll say this: if you grew up in a home, I grew up in a home that was a religious home, right? We grew up in the South, went to church every Sunday. Nothing wrong with going to church on Sunday. I'm a believer. I believe in Christ. I believe in the Bible. I believe in the Word of God. But many a times our emotions, if we grew up in religious homes, many a times our emotions were given this moral value. Rather than them just being emotions, they were given this value of being moral or immoral. If I got angry because somebody did me wrong, I may get the message that I'm immorally wrong because I'm angry. So I'm learning now to judge. So now it takes it up a whole nother layer. Not only, and this is the problem with that, not only are the people around me judging me, my parents, my caregivers, whoever it may be in your life when you were growing up, not only are those people judging me, but now when we put a moral value on our emotions, now God is judging me, right? So we take it up a whole nother dang step. We say, okay, not just the parents, but now God is judging me. Now, if you grew up in there and you respect what God has to say, you respect his word, now when you have these emotions as you get older, you're like, dang, well, if there was such a moral value that was placed on these emotions, well, I don't want to really have to be the person that admits that I'm feeling that, because I was taught that this emotion is something evil. This emotion is something wrong. It's something moral. And let's clear this up right now. Emotions are not moral or immoral. Emotions are not right or wrong. That's what we got to understand and get in our minds. Emotions are not right or wrong. Emotions are there to be clues. They're supposed to be clues. And so if they're supposed to be clues, instead of us judging our emotions, we oftentimes need to start investigating our emotions. So when I went through this experiment, I started asking myself the question, okay, I'm feeling a certain way and I'm feeling this emotion. Why am I feeling it? What's going on around me that's caused this? Who am I talking to right now? Who am I? Where am I at right now? How did I sleep? How am I feeling? How I started asking these follow-up questions. Like, I'm feeling insecure right now. Why? Who is it that I'm around? What are they doing? What am I doing? How am I feeling? I started investigating. I became an investigator rather than a judge when it came to my emotions. And that began to start helping me to start changing some things. And that's the thing that we need to lean more towards is, instead of us being the judge of our emotions, instead of us judging how we feel, let's start investigating how we feel. And then that turns us into, lastly, we need to understand that the reason I didn't, or you can't feel what you're feeling, is that oftentimes you think that you're not allowed to feel that way. This ties into the whole judgment thing. When I start judging my emotions and I start recognizing that these emotions are coming up and I place a judgment on them, for some reason, my next logical step would be, okay, if these are bad emotions, immoral emotions, then maybe I'm not allowed to feel like this. I'll say this as a Christian, this is something I really struggle with a lot. Let's say, maybe it may have been in a situation where I had to forgive somebody and I had to, give that forgiveness to this person or this individual. And maybe I just wasn't feeling that. And then because, right, we attach this moral value on a feeling and an emotion. Now I start feeling guilty that I'm not allowed to feel that way. Now I start feeling guilty that the way that I'm expressing myself or these things that I have coming up inside of me internally, I'm not allowed to feel that way. Culture, I feel like we seem to assign specific emotions to specific individuals. And I think that's been one of the downfall of our culture, right? Where we may look at an emotion and say, okay, that's a feminine emotion or that's a masculine emotion. How in the world, like, that doesn't make any sense to me. If emotions are neutral, they're across the board. Men can feel it, women can feel it, vice versa, whatever you want to look at. But how do we assign different emotions to different individuals and think that they're, because I feel a certain way or because I have an emotion come up, that I'm not allowed to feel this way? And so, we may say things to ourselves. I know I've said this to myself, that I don't have time to feel this way. I don't have space to be able to feel this way right now. Coming up, my background, I was in the military, and in the military, military minds, I feel like military minds, they do something to your mind in there. They change the whole way you think, the whole way you respond. I remember going through boot camp and just recognizing that these people, their job was to really strip me down as who I was. They were supposed to break me all the way down. I remember our RDC, our boot camp instructor saying, look, my job is to break you down and then build you back up into a sailor, build your mind back up into a sailor, build all these things back up into a sailor. And one of the things that I recognized that they did in the military was that a lot of times when certain emotions came up, and it makes sense in war. It makes sense when you're fighting somebody. It makes sense when you're in that life or death situation where you realize that certain emotions come up, and in that moment, you can't really go off of what that emotion is telling you. You have to be able to think logically. You have to be able to execute logically. You have to be able to execute in a certain way. And that made complete sense to me, because I've been in situations in the military where you are in a situation where you have to, we don't have time for the emotion in that moment. We don't have time for that emotion during this time, because if we give into what the emotion is telling us, if we give into all those different things, it could be a life or death situation. Now that makes complete sense to me, but we're talking about extremes here. We're talking about life or death situations. The problem that I felt that it kind of spills over into is in our everyday situations where things aren't life and death, things are just life. But because we get trained in such a way in the military to think logically, to think analytically, to think and not let emotions kind of dictate which way, we should move or which way we should go, we somehow think we need to take that into our everyday life. And sometimes that can be a burden for us. Sometimes that can actually hinder us, because when it's time for us to interact with our loved ones, with our family, with our spouses, we don't know how to shut that off. We don't know how to allow ourselves to be emotionally in tune to those around us. I was reading an article the other day, man, it made me so sad that out of the top 10 jobs that have the highest rate of divorce, out of the top 3, the number 1 was bartender. Makes sense, right? You kind of kicking back. You ain't, there's so many things going on in the atmosphere. Number 2 was a dancer or an adult entertainer. Kind of makes sense to me too. But the number 3, so the top 3 was military. And as somebody that has been in the military, I was like, man, how is it that we send men and women off to serve our country, to protect our country, but yet we don't give them the tools to maintain their relationships, to maintain their marriages? It's hard enough being on deployment. It's hard enough being out there and having to deal with all these different things. And then now to come back on the home front and have to learn how to deal with emotions and learn how to deal with relationships is challenging. And I thought to myself, I said, this can't be right, that the people that are out here protecting us and allowing us to even be able to be in relationships and safe and married, they are not getting the tools that they need. And so I feel like oftentimes what happens is like what I'm talking about. We get trained to think a certain way. We get trained to not really rely on our emotions to investigate them, but rather to judge them and not to really trust them. And this spills out into all different areas of our life. We need it on the battlefield, but we don't need it on the home front, right? We need it. We need to be emotionally attuned in our homes with our family and our wives and our children and our husbands and whatever it may be, right? We need those different things. And so, when we look at those issues, we understand that in certain cultures and certain pockets of our society, we are taught that we're not allowed to feel these type of emotions in this type of way. And that ends up becoming a problem for most of us. And so as I wrap up and land the plane and kind of come back to the surface on this, how do we reverse these different things? Well, I think there's three main ways that we can do it, right? And it's three odds. This could be my pastor coming out of it. So hold on with me. Here we go. Number one, we need to identify. Like I mentioned, the problem that we have with not being able to feel the way we feel is because we can't identify what it is we're feeling. The problem with that is if I can't identify what I'm feeling, I can't know how I'm supposed to act in a constructive way. If I don't know what the ingredients are supposed to be or what the ingredients are that I'm feeling, I'm not going to know how to bake the cake. I'm not going to know how to do this right. So first step we have to do is we have to learn how to identify. Where does that start at? That starts with our self-awareness. I always say that self-awareness is the foundation to our emotional wellness. If I want to become emotionally in tune, if I want to build my emotional intelligence, it starts with me being self-aware. I have to understand, as a man, as a woman, as an individual, I got to understand what it is I'm feeling on the inside. I got to understand what it is that I'm actually, what the heck is going on inside of here, right? What's going on inside of here? A lot of times, and especially in our society, we're so outwardly focused, right? Because we're distracted by all these different things. We're distracted by what this person is doing, what they got going on social media, that we never really try and pay attention to what's going on in our internal world. And here's the reality of this. At the end of life, all the outside distractions ain't gonna be there when it's the end of life for you. It's only gonna be what we got going on the inside. So I have to begin to learn how to become self-aware, to really learn how to identify what it is that I'm feeling. And like I said, I'm gonna put a tool down below that can help you to identify. You can download that where it can help you to identify, hey, these different emotions, these different things are coming up in my life. There's also another app that I use is called How We Feel. It's an app on my phone. And at any given point in the day, I can check in and it gives me a whole breakdown of all these different emotions. And I can sit down and I can evaluate, and I can think about what it is I'm feeling, how I'm feeling, and why I'm feeling those different ways. So number one, we got to learn how to identify. Number two, we got to learn how to investigate. We have to investigate. So instead of me being a judge, I'm going to be an investigator. Instead of me asking these questions on why I'm doing this or beating myself up about feeling certain ways, I want to get curious to why I'm feeling that. Once I identify a certain emotion, I want to start asking questions and begin to get curious on why I'm feeling that way. Because when I did this experiment, what I recognized and I learned was that there were a lot of times that I was feeling certain things, and it would be at a certain time of the day. It'd be talking to a certain individual. It'd be at a certain place. And I started getting curious about that. And I started understanding, like, okay, every time I talk to this person, I feel this way. Now, up until that point, I could have maybe felt that, right? I might have felt that tension on the inside, but until I started identifying what I was doing and started investigating why I was feeling that way, it was just a feeling that would keep coming up. But when we start investigating, when we start becoming detectives, that's how I want to say it. When we become detectives of our emotions, we can realize that our emotions are really trying to show us things. They're really trying to lead us in certain things. They're really trying to lead us in certain paths and really try and open up and help us to explore and understand what it is going on inside of us. And so that second part of it is learning how to investigate. And then lastly, what we need to do in order to learn how to start feeling is we got to start inviting those things. We got to start inviting those things, right? We learn how to identify, we learn how to investigate, and then we learn how to invite. Because I can't control how these feelings and when these feelings come up. I can't control it. You can try and control it. You try and control it as much as you want. You can see how it kind of plays out. I've tried to say, okay, how I'm going to control how I'm feeling happy today. I'm going to control how I'm, responding today and all these different things. But one of the things I realized and I learned was that when it comes to our emotions, it's hard for us to control those things. And so if I can't control it, the other side to that is I have to just invite it. I have to invite it in and understand that, okay, this is an emotion I'm feeling. This is something that I'm going through right now. This is a spot where I'm in, and I got to be comfortable enough to deal with that and just sit in that for a minute, right? And it could be emotions that are very uncomfortable. It could be emotions that are very scary. It could be emotions that terrify you. I felt things, and we all probably have felt things that have come up within us emotionally that have scared the hell out of us, right? And that have put us in a place and put us in a space where we didn't know like what we were feeling and why we were feeling this way and how we were feeling. So the flip side to that is I have to learn how to invite it, because the emotion is trying to teach me something. It's trying to show me something. It's trying to guide me, right? It's trying to allow me to understand what these environments are telling me, what maybe my interactions with people are trying to tell me. It's trying to give me all these clues on how I can move in a certain direction. And if I learn how to invite those emotions in, I'll be able to move in a direction that is more constructive, instead of doing things and responding in a way that causes me more harm or causes other people harm and pain. Maybe I can learn how to invite that in, sit with that emotion, and then learn how to move in a way that is going to be beneficial to me and move me towards my goals. And so those are the three things I think that we can do: is we can identify, we can investigate these emotions, right? And then lastly, we can learn how to invite these emotions in. And so this wraps up what I have today on why we can't feel what we can feel and what we can do in order to learn how to feel those things. And so I want to hear from you below. What do you think on these different things? Have you ever struggled with being able to identify your emotions? Have you ever struggled with being able to invite your emotions in, right? And what are some ways and what are some things that you can do to learn how to do, and what things have helped you? What things have benefited you in this process? But until next time, this has been Nick with the Life Recreator Podcast. Keep learning, keep healing, and keep growing. Peace.